Welcome to Voices Unseen Quietly Real, where real lives are remembered, not loudly, but truthfully, and welcome to episode 2 of the Quietly Real series. I didn't always speak softly. There was a time when my voice filled rooms naturally, not aggressively, just confidently, the way voices do when they belong to someone who trusts themselves. I didn't raise it to dominate, I raised it to be heard, and for a while that felt like enough. The first time I noticed the shift, it was in a conference room that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and printer toner. The table was too long, the chairs too close, and my notebook lay open with careful handwriting that already felt like evidence. I spoke the way I always had, clear and direct, and the room went quiet in a way that felt different. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else adjusted their pen. Then a manager smiled and said, gently, that maybe I should dial it back a little, just so everyone felt comfortable contributing. I nodded, because nodding had already become a reflex. I wrote the note down as if it were feedback, not a warning, and I told myself I was reading too much into it. But I felt something settle in my chest, something small and heavy, like a door closing quietly. After that, I started listening to myself more than the room. I paid attention to how my words landed, how my tone sounded against the walls, how my confidence echoed back as something else. I noticed that when I spoke plainly, I was described as intense, and when I spoke firmly, I was described as sharp. No one ever said angry. They didn't have to. The space around the word was enough. So I adjusted. I softened my voice the way you soften lighting in a room you don't own. I added qualifiers to sentences that didn't need them and apologies to thoughts that were already complete. I started sentences with, I might be wrong, even when I wasn't. I smiled before speaking, during speaking, after speaking, as if expression itself needed cushioning. My ideas didn't change, but the way I delivered them did, like fragile items wrapped in layers, so no one could accuse them of breaking something. Meetings became performances of restraint. I watched the clock more than the people, timed my contributions so they wouldn't feel like interruptions. I learned to pause before finishing a thought, just long enough for someone else to step in and say it louder. When that happened, I told myself it was collaboration. When my idea came back to me in a different voice, praised as innovative, I told myself the room needed translation. I learned to clap quietly for my own thoughts when they arrived wearing someone else's mouth. There were sensory things I began to associate with this shift. The dryness in my throat when I held back. The way my shoulders tightened when I felt myself shrinking mid-sentence. The sound of my pen tapping when I chose silence instead of correction. At home, I replayed conversations the way some people replay arguments. I adjusted my tone and memory, wondered if a word had landed too hard, if my face had given away something I wasn't allowed to show. Exhaustion didn't come from the work. It came from the editing. People praised me for being easy to work with. They said I was calm, balanced, professional, and I understood that these words were compliments shaped like expectations. I carried them carefully, because dropping them felt dangerous. Once, a colleague pulled me aside and said they admired how composed I was. They said they could never tell when I disagreed. I smiled and thanked them, even though what I wanted to say was that disagreement doesn't disappear just because it's quiet. The truth was, I was tired long before I was ever angry. Tired of measuring myself against reactions I couldn't control. Tired of rehearsing sentences in my head while other people spoke freely. I noticed how different voices were allowed different weights. How some people could interrupt and be called passionate, while I paused and was called polite. How certainty sounded like leadership until it came from me. There were days I lowered my voice so much I barely recognized it. It floated instead of landing, drifted instead of grounding. And when no one responded, I wondered if silence was safer than clarity, but something strange happened over time. The quieter I became, the more invisible my work felt. The more invisible I felt, the more effort it took to stay present. I realized that respectability wasn't protection, it was maintenance. It asked me to keep the room comfortable at the cost of my own breath. It rewarded me for shrinking and called it professionalism. I didn't have a moment of rebellion. There was no dramatic confrontation, no speech that changed everything. There was just a morning when I heard my own voice in the mirror and missed it. So I made small changes. I stopped apologizing before speaking. I let my sentences end where they wanted to. I allowed silence after my words, not as permission, but as presence. When someone called me intense, I asked them what they meant. When someone redirected me unnecessarily, I redirected the conversation back. I didn't raise my voice, but I stopped lowering it. Some people noticed. Some didn't. The room didn't collapse, and neither did I. What I learned was this: self-editing keeps peace, but it also keeps score. It records every compromise and asks you to carry them quietly. And eventually, the weight shows. I wasn't angry. I was aware. I was tired of mistaking survival for success. This was Voices Unseen Quietly Real, Episode 2, and there are more true stories coming soon. So if you'd like to hear more like this in the future, you're welcome to subscribe and return whenever you need a quiet place to listen.